Hello, everyone. Kirsa, John, Rashad, and I would like to welcome you to our final project presentation, where we will be talking to you about the legacy of the Pakistani Taliban on girls' access to education in the country. I'm sure you've heard of Malala Yousafzai. She is the youngest Nobel Peace Prize laureate in the world and a Pakistani activist for female education. Her story lies in Swat Valley in northern Pakistan, where in 2012 she was shot in the head by a Taliban gunman on her way to school. In Pakistan, many girls have to endanger their lives in order to get access to basic education due to the presence of the Pakistani Taliban in the country. The question here is, who are the Pakistani Taliban? So the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, more commonly known as the Pakistani Taliban, is an umbrella term for the deadliest militant organization in the country. They were created in the 1990s, around the same time the Afghan Taliban came into being, and they found safe havens in the tribal areas of northwestern Pakistan, namely FATA, the federally administered tribal area, and the northwestern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or KPK. Their goal has been to overthrow the Pakistani government and implement Sharia law in the nation. According to them, it is un-Islamic for girls to go to school, particularly those schools that follow Western modes of education, and they have threatened populations in areas where they have strong influence to prevent women and girls from leaving their homes, particularly unaccompanied by male guardians. In 2007, as you can see the map here, they were able to expand their terrorism to urban centers like Karachi, Quetta, and Lahore in other provinces of Pakistan. From 2014 to 2018, TTP activities declined as they became more fragmented, and the Pakistan Army was able to successfully counter that threat. However, in recent years, there has been a resurgence of TTP activity. In particular, 2021 saw a 42% increase from the previous year in TTP attacks. And we think that this is a serious cause for concern when it comes to girls' education in Pakistan. So we want to take a data-oriented approach to study the cause and effect of the TTP's terrorist incursions that started in 2007 on girls' access to education in the rural areas of Pakistan. And Clarissa is now going to tell you how we went about designing the study.
Yes, thank you. So in order to find this causal effect that people were talking about, we proposed a difference in difference model that compares the enrollment rates of girls in primary school in areas of Pakistan that were occupied or controlled by the Taliban, that northwestern area that we was showing before, to the enrollment rate of girls in primary school that in areas that were not controlled by the Taliban, sorry. Why do we choose this model? Well, it's first a very simple to implement model. It's also easy to communicate results. Also, because the TTP did not randomly select the areas of Pakistan they were going to establish themselves in, we did not have a randomized experiment to establish causation. So that means there are baseline differences between these locations that we're trying to compare. The difference approach that we have here, it accepts these differences as long as we have groups or we're comparing groups that trend the same way across years. So in a way to illustrate this in the next slide is to, here, for example, we have two groups of districts that we want to compare and the enrollment rate of girls for. And then the first one on the left, we have districts like South Waziristan, where girls like Fatima and Amina live. And this is one of the districts where TTP militants settled after 2007. On the other side, we have Miriam and Aisha were in the district of Punjab, where the Taliban were not physically present. So these are the two types of districts that we want to compare in our model. And on the next slide, we can see that because these two types of districts were inherently different, they are different parts of the country and they have actually different enrollment rates, which is the response variable that we're trying to compare. We can observe here in this graph that on rural areas controlled by Taliban before 2007, and this is the trend before there was any incursion started by the Taliban, we can see that the enrollment rate is slightly lower, but it trends in parallel to the other rural areas of Pakistan. So that satisfies the assumption that even if there wasn't any intervention of Pakistani Taliban in in any of these areas, they would trend similarly, or that's the assumption that we're trying to make. Now let's look at the trends after the Taliban incursion happened in 2007. So in this next slide, we see that if we fit a linear model to the trend after 2008, we get a negative trend for enrollment rate in Taliban-controlled regions and a positive trend for the rest of the rural regions in Pakistan. That's the red one. The blue one. Visually, this suggests that the Taliban proximity may be causing enrollment rates in girls in primary school to drop. However, we ran a linear regression to get the average difference in difference coefficient between these two groups, and we found that it was actually a small positive increase in enrollment rates, and it was not statistically significant. So just to reiterate, in this slide, we have that we did not find a statistically significant difference in enrollment rates of girls in TTP-controlled districts compared to other rural districts. However, this does not mean that there isn't an effect, just that we didn't find one. And on this next slide, I can illustrate a little bit of how we obtained this coefficient. So we compared again, like on the left, we have Fatima and Amina from South Waziristan. We got the average difference in enrollment rates in districts just like South Waziristan before and after 2007, and we got that is actually increasing in 0.12 points, percentage points. And on the other side, on the right side, we have the average difference in enrollment rates before and after 2007 for the other rural districts that were not controlled or did not have physical presence of the Taliban, and the increase is actually 0.09 percentage points. That's a little bit lower than our treatment group, than the other groups. So that means that on average, the districts that did suffer TTP strongholds show a larger increase in enrollment rates on average compared to the other rural locations, which is exactly the opposite of the hypothesis that we're trying to prove. Now, John is going to tell you a little bit more about the process of how we got to this conclusion and some of the challenges of fitting this model.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. We will look at how we arrived here in the previous slide. Yeah. So we used, we selected educational enrollment data from two surveys. The first survey is the Pakistan Social and Living Measurement Survey, and the second is the Household Integrated Economic Survey. The objectives of these two surveys are to monitor the efforts of the Pakistani government to achieve the UN's Millennium Development Goals. These surveys have geographically representative samples of about 200 to 250 households, which were surveyed in each district. Now, our experiment designed, we defined our treatment group as rural areas, which have been under the control of the TTP, and rural areas which were not under the control of the TTP were our control group. And for our response variable, we calculated enrollment rates for girls between the ages of 4 and 10 for our treatment group and for our control group. And we chose 4 to 10 because, as stated earlier, one of the Millennium Development Goals is to achieve universal primary education, and 4 to 10 years is the age range for universal primary education. That's defined by the UN. So on the next slide, it goes without saying that we need to highlight some of the limitation inherent with the data that we worked with. We don't have data for 2009, 2016, and 2017. Our unit of observation is at a district level, and ideally, you for each year, for each of the 13 years of data that we analyzed, you'd want a consistent district level data for each of these years. But we saw that this was not the case. The collection of districts surveyed is not the same for each year. We saw the larger districts were subdivided into smaller areas in 2018 and 2019. And more importantly, we saw some regions and districts had names that were changed as a result of the constitutional reform in 2018. We also found out that 2007 was an outlier. We had very little enrollment rates for that year, and we could attribute that to significant political turmoil in Pakistan during that year, and we had to drop that year. Yeah, and we also saw that there were too many missing districts in the survey collected for 2018. So we had other limitations which were related to the model also. K-12 education, which is primary education in Pakistan, is compulsory. So we suspect that for some of the respondents to the survey, we suspect that if for some respondents whose wards were not enrolled in school, we cannot fully trust that we got accurate results from the survey. We also saw that the average difference in difference coefficient does not test for parallelism of the trends because it's merely a mean value. We observed lower enrollment rates in the last 2 years of the PSLM survey because more remote areas were being included for the first time. There are some future works which we believe would have more meaningful impact. We need to explore the difference between boys and girls enrollment rates as our response variable. This will be a triple difference in difference analysis, and will help reassure us that we are not capturing differences in schooling availability generally, but rather differences in schooling availability to young girls in particular. I'll pass it on to Rashad, who will wrap it up. Thanks.
Thanks, John. So to bring everything together, we're interested in finding the causal effects of TTP terrorist incursions that started in 2007 on girls' access to education in rural areas of Pakistan. Our approach implemented a difference in difference model to contrast girls' enrollment rates in districts of Pakistan where TTP had a presence after the year 2007 with all of the rural districts. Our results indicated that we did not find a statistically significant difference in enrollment rates of girls in TTP-controlled districts compared to other rural districts. This brings us to our conclusion of not finding a causal effect. But even if no causal effect was found, that does not mean the Taliban had no influence in girls' access to primary education. Reasons we may not have found a causal effect include our data and model limitations. But if we were to find a causal effect on girls' enrollment rates caused by TTP presence, there may be potential violation. We hope that you enjoyed our presentation.